Hello, everyone, and welcome to Stronger. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm here with Phil Merton and Mark Wenzel.
How you doing?
Um,
Howdy.
last week, we started talking about the conversation of parental guilt associated with incarceration. And one of the things that came to our minds as we were thinking more about that conversation is the role that cycles of poverty play into that. It's our goal tonight to talk a little bit about those cycles of poverty and some of the things that can arise as part of that. So we're going to go ahead and kind of get into that. But Phil, I think you had something that you wanted to say prior
I,
to that.
I did. One of the things that if if you feel like you're getting some benefit from this series, we're glad. Hey, we're first of all just so glad that's happening, and thanks for tuning in. Uh, and if you want to help support this effort, keep this going forward, um, we sure could use the support. So think about that prayerful thing about can I can I throw a few bucks this way? And is that a simple thing to do, Ruth? How to give support?
Yeah, there's a gift page on the Voice of the Middle Ground website.
Okay, all right. So anyway, think about that, and let's get into this topic, which is something that okay, I Mark
Where'd it go?
disappeared.
he just
He just went away. I'm out of here, he said. Ah, I feel so neglected. Oh, I'll get over it. Take me a minute. Take a deep breath. All
Maybe we
right,
need to sign a petition to bring Mark back.
let's do that. Yeah. He heard somebody ask for money and he said, "I'm out of here." Oops. Oh, I just got a text from him. He says internet went out.
Oh.
Okay. Oh, what is? Oh, that's so sad. Okay. Well, he'll
Well,
join us, I guess, when he can.
it's you and me, Phil.
Yeah. And uh, I know, speaking for myself, looking at poverty and its effects on people. Well, okay, I throughout the years, especially in my years of ministry, I've had plenty of experience with poverty and incarceration, but it's been basically secondhand. Uh, I I'm an outsider looking in. I talk with the people who have been living in that world. I lived in a very poor neighborhood for a few years, but only a few, as opposed to somebody who's lived there from little on and without much hope of ever moving beyond that. That's not my world. I'm on the outside looking in, and I want to join forces. Uh, and well, that's where we people like me need to ask questions. We need to have a conversation. So people who are on the inside of this, who've grown up inside this, who know it well, like Ruth, uh, need to talk, need to find out what's going on there. So thanks a lot for sharing your life experiences, Ruth. Uh,
Yeah, and kind of going in relation to what you've said, I think it's also important to note that while I did grow up having less than some of the people I went to school with, or some of the other people um, in in different communities, there are undoubtedly people who had it worse than I did,
mm,
and in this situation. That's also something that I feel like it's important to acknowledge.
okay.
Um, Before we get into experience or anything, there's some stats from the National Low Income Housing Coalition that I think it's
Mm,
important for us to look at. That'll help us to get a better idea, really, of the scope of the problem and what kind of is related to that. So we'll actually go ahead and also put the link to this in the chat. So One of the things to note is that over 580,000 people are experiencing homelessness on any given night.
Well over
Seventy
half a
percent,
million. Jeez. Okay,
yeah,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
70% of all extremely low income families pay more than half their income in rent. Um, Only 1 in 4 extremely low income families who need assistance actually get it. And
Mm.
there's no state or county as of when this was created where a renter working full time at minimum wage can afford a 2 bedroom apartment. And when you take into account the fact that there are a lot of families and communities where having multiple family members living under the same roof is a commonality, that kind of just tells you even more of how big of a problem that is.
Wow. That oh, that blows me away. Um, oh, something else I don't know. This might be worth mentioning. The people that study this, there's different ways of rating income, but there's one I'm looking at here is Bureau of Justice statistics. It says they split it up into four. There's high income, middle income, low income, and then there's poor, and that's at or below the federal poverty level. So low income is not that's not considered poverty. So uh, this is people at or below the federal poverty level. So differentiation there.
Mm-hmm.
And just let's see. Can I do a screen share here for a second? Is that possible? I don't see the button. Oh wait, is that here? Share screen. Hold on. Let me try that. Uh, okay. Okay. If you can see this chart here. I apologize if it's tiny. That this according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics National Crime Victimization Survey 2012, um, you can see that people at or below the poverty level are they are twice as likely to be the victim of violent crimes as somebody in middle income. Um,
Hmm.
that holds true. Well, let's see, all over the country, no matter where you are. Even it's even true across race. Black, and you're below the poverty level. White, below the poverty level. Um, it's it's pretty much the same. Rates are pretty much the same. A little different if you're Latino, and I'm not sure what that's about. But uh, for all of us who are black and white, and if you're below the poverty level, very high degree of likelihood you're going to be victim of violent crime. So, with that in mind, what is the connection that you see, Ruth, from your experience? How is low income housing? Uh, how can that be a setup for being a eventual crime victim or getting it, or better still, how is it a setup for being eventually incarcerated?
Um, what I can speak to here really is my experience and my experience with people that I have had that I've gone to school with and that I've lived in the community with. Um, and as far as low income housing and really poverty in general, one of the things that can happen if a person is in a community that is impoverished, especially if they grow up in a family that is below the poverty line and that has been for generations, is that poverty really runs in cycles. Um, and so if you don't see that there is another way to do things, one of the things that happens is that you can fall into a trap of um, you can fall into the trap of falling into that sort of system of doing things yourself.
Hmm.
Another thing to think about when we're talking about this conversation about lower income families is that sometimes within those families, what we see is that there is an incarcerated parent,
Yeah.
And if a parent is incarcerated, and this is something that we've talked about on previous live streams, is that the likelihood that the child will be incarcerated is also affected there. Um,
Uh, yeah. Well, you fall into what you're used to, what you see. What you see when you're growing up, you tend to go there. That's the norm. That's how people live. So sure, I can see that. Oh, yeah, and when two parents aren't around, incarceration is the norm. Goes from being unthinkable to something else. But
mhm.
another question I had, you came from a conversation with you earlier. You said that there's uh, a tendency people have to, when you see low income, to immediately think in terms of race. Uh, low income, low income housing. It's all about whether you're a person of color. And you said that it's a false assumption, and it's a harmful assumption. What, if I remember right?
Well, I would say it definitely is a harmful assumption if when you see a person of color or when you think about lower income families, you automatically go to person of color
Mm,
because what that does is it limits the opportunities that people have available to them. Because when you think about a person, this is what you're thinking, this is your expectation of them, then what's
ah,
going to follow is that you feel as though they're unable to handle certain things,
mm,
whether or not that's something that's accurate or based on stereotype or racism in some instances or not. That's just the reality of that.
okay. And so people are only going to tend to rise only to no higher than what's expected of them. And if my expectations are low because, well, you're poor, you're not white, then if that's a employers are thinking, if that's a school is thinking, it's gonna form a ceiling that they'll bump up against.
Well, as we're talking about this, there's two studies that are actually coming to mind for me. One of them is are you familiar with the Pygmalion effect?
Tell me more.
Basically, what happened with that is you have two different groups. Could have been more than that, I guess. One group, the expectations were voiced that they were able to do things, that they could be successful, that they could achieve the outcomes that were required, and then the other group, they were basically communicated to in kind of the opposite sense, where this was not something that they could do, that they would not be able to rise up to those standards.
Hmm,
And at the end, the people who were able to rise up to those standards and even to exceed them were the people who had more expected of them.
okay. Wow. And so where you live, uh, knowing where a person comes from, that can lower expectations of them and thus lower achievement. If I'm hearing you. Wow.
It can definitely, although another thing to state is that it's definitely possible, even with that being the case, for people to still exceed,
Hmm.
but it is something that that in some cases will take more work to do
Hmm.
that. Something else that is coming to mind for me, I I'm not entirely sure what the name of the study was, but basically, students were taught that having brown eyes was a bad thing, and having a different color set of eyes was a better thing. What One of the things that was found there is that I think is important here. Um, I'm sorry, I just blanked. um,
Eddie, what happens if you're told brown eye's bad,
Yeah,
different color eye good?
that was Jane Elliott experiment.
Oh, hey,
50
all right.
years in the making of doing that. She's been doing it a long time.
Huh.
It's been, I mean, made big national news, and like Oprah did it, had Jane on and did it.
Hmm.
I remember watching that a couple of years ago when this was kind of coming up, and it plays right into what you were saying, Ruth, as far as that positive or negative reinforcement. You know, because the people with certain color eyes were told everything bad about them. They're no good, no good, no good, and then the opposite. And yeah, it really was very interesting to see that and to think about how that is part of one's upbringing, whichever side you're on, in the sense of hearing this stuff and seeing it reinforced in so many subtle little ways, in our white community, of the lower expectations and just those connections, poverty, black crime, black drugs, black, those kind of things go together so easily. And, the ability to overcome that. And of course, that's good news is kind of in the whole idea of our Christian faith, that ability to be victorious, to overcome with Jesus, and I think the major key thing there is when our connection with Jesus is, I love you. You're important to me. You're worth everything to me. I died for you. As a very positive message that can be given, and why I think sometimes a lot of our schools can be very successful in that, because that is the foundation that they're building on, is you are somebody. As long as we don't let the sin, the hammer of the law creep in too heavily, but we got to keep on that love side. And yeah, that's definitely a very challenging thing that we don't always see the power of our words, negatively or positively.
Yep.
Glad to be back, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah, it's good to have you back.
Yeah.
You're back and you have words, and I'm wondering when the invasion of the body snatchers happened.
I'm thinking about the housing thing again. You said, let's see, so few people have a way of getting out of this, and even difficulty in accessing the assistance that's available. You mentioned statistics about that. I'm thinking back to something you've told me about how filling in the blanks, applying and getting government assistance is not just by virtue of living in poverty. That makes just applying for the assistance almost an unattainable thing for a lot of people. Things like if you're not living in your own house, if you're living with a relative, well, you don't have a permanent address, and that screws up a government form right there. What can you tell me about ways that poverty makes it difficult to apply for help to get out of poverty?
I would say another challenge that people maybe don't necessarily think about is that if you are someone who's in poverty and you are living with a relative and maybe they're in a situation too and they're getting benefits, that can kind of complicate things even more, as far as getting you on them. It seems as though when it comes to social programs, the number of hoops that you have to kind of jump through in order just to get that assistance, it's a lot. It's a process. And then when we couple that with things like how even working full time, people who are making minimum wage are not able to make enough to pay for more than a 1-bedroom apartment. That's even more difficult, because you're taking someone who is in a situation like that and then also asking them to basically take on a full-time job of trying to get assistance. And then even when we look at the stat that only 1 in 4 people who are in lower income are actually able to get those, then it's you're asking them to take on that full-time job on top of a full-time job without the promise of actually even being able to receive any benefits for that work.
Yeah. How about the stigma that's attached to asking for assistance?
There's definitely a lot of that.
I think of going back quite a ways, but the terminology of welfare queens and just everything that's attached to somebody who's getting any kind of assistance, that there's just this suspicion of laziness, of not even a suspicion of it, but just, outright saying, yeah, they're just lazy. They should just get a job. And like you said, getting a job doesn't solve the problem. If it's such a minimum wage job that isn't a living wage, and then if you lose benefits when you get that job, which is easier way to do it. And yeah, that's a minefield that, again, they don't understand from the outside looking in. I mean, I hear people, and we've said, oh, well, we were on food stamps, or we were on this, and, then we did that. But you probably weren't the subject of as much stigmatizing as other people groups, where you went or how you were perceived was just so totally different. I know when we, younger days with the kids, and maybe we were getting WIC for, women, infants, and children stuff for the kids. And, kind of depending where you went to get that, if you went further into the city, then you were kind of looked at as like, what are you doing here? And other places like, oh, welcome. And I know my wife sometimes felt kind of a little bit, stigma at times, but definitely not nearly, I'm sure, what others have. And I'm going to shut up for a sec.
That was really striking what you said, Ruth, about us being like a full-time job, just applying for assistance.
Use a person's pre-tax income as proof of whether or not they need the help, not considering the impact of the tax. That is so true.
Wow.
Pre-tax income. Okay.
Pre-tax income. Taxation. Yeah, my goodness. Oh.
And then, depending on where you live, those taxes are going to be even higher than in a different state. And yeah.
You said, if I want to shift to education for a little bit, if I could, because you'd mentioned, Ruth, that the education system sometimes doesn't. It sets people up, people who are living in poverty. It sets them up for further risk of becoming incarcerated. Okay, one of the things that you mentioned has to do with people going to school, but needing to work at the same time. It is just absolute necessity, not because to have spending money, but to have food on the table. So, what have you observed? What happens when you have that phenomenon?
So you have a household that's already. Yes, unfortunately, schools can be a lot like jails.
Oh yeah.
But
that's true no matter what poverty level or income level you're in.
You have a situation already where the household can't afford the things that it needs. You have a child that grows up and sees that, and maybe they want to try and help with that, or maybe it's a necessity where even though they might not want to, the parents kind of have to push them to get a job and balance school, depending on the hours that they have to do. Because I mean, you're in school during the day, and you work at night, and then you have whatever responsibilities you have in your household. One of the things that's going to happen right away is something's going to slip. So it may be that you end up sleeping in class. It may be that maybe you're truant because you have all these things that you're trying to balance, and then you have truancy that in some cases is something where they actually take you to court for. And so even with that, you're getting people involved in these things pretty early. And how are they supposed to come back from that?
Yeah, right. how old do you come back from that?
Right. How is discipline handled? Right. Like you say, truancy, other discipline becomes criminal so quickly in so many schools. We talked about that probably way back.
Yeah.
The school to prison pipeline. And but the other things you mentioned too is like, what are all the other social factors involved when this child gets to school? What are some of the things that they're dealing with? I know my wife is at Wisconsin Lutheran High School, and right away early on, she noticed certain kids were really struggling with getting there on time and different things. And her first instinct was, well, there's truancy, there's punishment, there's delinquency. And then whatever happened, though, she was able to have some conversation with them. You start finding out what's going on. The morning comes, I've got to get my siblings ready for their school. I have to help mom get ready for going to where she's going. And we all have to work this out with one vehicle or maybe no vehicle, and everyone get where they have to go. They're on buses for an hour and a half to get to school. From the
And the thing
city
about the thing about buses is, I mean, sometimes they come late, sometimes they don't, sometimes they don't come at all when you need them to, and then all of a sudden you have like a whole other list of problems.
Yeah. And if one person gets sick in the household, who's got to? Sometimes that the oldest kid has to step up and stay home and take care of things. There's just so many factors again that I can't even understand. But that's you go back to the schools and like the constant complaint of the schools are failing our kids. The schools are failing our kids. Well, why? Well, when you start looking at it, it comes down to funding. I mean, going back to even desegregation when they decided it's okay, we're going to desegregate our schools. And that means you black kids, you have to leave your neighborhood and go someplace else. But we didn't bring anybody into the inner city.
Yeah.
We just took away. And then the funding, I mean, as much as I know a lot of people love school choice, but where does that funding come from? It comes from a lot of the public, from the public schools. And it's kind of I have kind of a love-hate relationship with that, in the sense of, well, our schools are doing better, our private schools are doing better, but, it has just made the public schools even a worse situation because of less funding. And even the whole funding formula they're probably whacked way out of content, out of where they should be. But that's a huge, the social, the social context here that you've been talking about, all the things that you've been talking about so far. I don't know if you got where we're at time wise in that, but at some point too, it's interesting. This just happened on Friday at a conference I was at, and you're talking about criminal thinking, and really went into the health issues involved with it, and all these social things that we're talking about, the poverty, the lack of education, lack of food, and that is there. And then also you get into, and that leads into the biological aspect of things. If you have poor nutrition, if you have substandard housing that has lead paint and lead pipes, what does the lead do to you? If you're living in a place where you are constantly on edge and you're chemical, you're totally always at this anxiety level, what's going on around you, how does that adversely affect you? And they're saying this all works in there, and then and it just all starts to combine into this perfect storm of disaster that they're understanding. It's, again, we don't always understand the fact that, well, there's housing, and like you say, what can you afford? And so much of it is so substandard by any means. That's one of the things my wife looks into too with one of her classes, and it said most of our housing is substandard according to federal guidelines. And that's what effect does that have?
Yeah.
Kind of like a friend of mine back from grade school, and I saw him many years later. He went to the same school. And then he made this statement at one point when I was kind of questioning some of his attitudes and different things. He goes, at the end of the day, I went to my neighborhood and you went to yours. And those two neighborhoods were vastly different.
Hmm.
There was a gulf between us.
Yeah.
And how did that affect his life in so many different ways?
We had a comment over here from Diamond, kind of going back for a second to the truancy. She says the fact that truancy is a punishable crime is a joke to me because low-key it looks as though these systems are using any and everything to punish these kids and their families, knowing that they have to go the extra mile, literally just to even show.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's so easy to think if you got a problem, break out the hammer. Bigger the problem, the bigger the hammer.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do? How do you get people to? How do you change behavior? Punish them.
I might get in a little trouble for saying this,
Fire away! I want to
but
hear it. Yeah.
but looking at this, one of the things that we talked about earlier is that poverty is not just a situation that's faced by people of color. At the same time, I would say that there are some communities in which people of color are disproportionately falling within those categories, and so the truancy laws disproportionately in those areas would affect people of color.
Yeah.
So it kind of feels a bit racist.
Mm-hmm. Why? And when these things that you've done at school or failed to do, showing up, whatever. And now there's, the criminal justice system. It's being treated as a crime. Well, all right, there you are. What's the connection between all of this, these problems with schooling and risk for incarceration? Well, right there, already got a record. Anything else about how this problems with schooling, how that puts a person at risk for eventual incarceration? The criminals. Oh, that's a good point.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Criminalization of poverty largely impacts people of color. Yes. Criminalization. Ooh, that's, yeah.
For those of us who are not able to see what's in the chat right now, Diamond just said, if they're allergic to chocolate, they can just say that.
Yeah. All right.
That's why we're laughing, not because what was said before that.
All
right.
You gotta laugh, because otherwise you're just gonna bawl and cry. Because the things that study after studies out there that shows just a disproportionate weight that falls on minority communities, African American communities especially, in so many different areas. You get into drug laws and drug prosecutions and that, and the statistics are all there. It's just again and again and again that the penalties, the mandatory sentences.
Yeah.
I think the mandatory sentence for having a little bit of cocaine or crack, for crack was 30 times more than the same amount of cocaine, powder cocaine.
Mm-hmm.
President Obama actually lowered it to only 10 times different.
Jeez.
But there's still a difference. There's still a difference.
Wow.
And it's just, your head just, boggles at it until you read this stuff. And just read something yesterday with something out of the Nixon administration where they said, well, we can't outlaw not liking the war. And so, and something else. And then they said, so we're going to attack them, where it hurts. So you go after the hippies with marijuana, and you went after the black people with cocaine and heroin. You criminalize that, and then you bust them up, and you break their power because, they're not playing our game.
Wow.
So the penalties were so politically driven.
Wow.
just to keep, to break, we're not getting our way, and so we're gonna do it this way, and it's just, I mean, it's mind blowing. It's something. It's like, okay, where'd this come from? But it's out there, and that kind of stuff, and you keep running across it, and you kind of go, really? And then, of course, and then the shame of our country right now is people trying to suppress this information and not let this kind of information out. That there's much more behind what's going on than just, we used to have slavery.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
and
yeah, I'd say the unfortunate reality of so much of policy being driven by politics is something that it would be great if it was gotten rid of, but unfortunately, with the way that people are, I have to wonder if that will ever be the case when it won't be that way.
Right. And that's where you kind of have to come back to, okay, what do we do in this smaller place? What do we do with the people in front of us? What do we do with the people who we meet? And what do we encourage? And I mean, sure, saw a woman in the hospital today, younger African-American woman, and she was dealing with health issues, but then on top of that was just a lack of positivity in her life. She joined a church, and she had moved from a different city, joined a church here, and she has limited, in her denomination, what she follows, limited avenues for that, and the one she's in just was faced with so much negativity. It was just negative. I don't need that. I asked about family. So yeah, I've got family around here, but I can't be near their energy either. It's just so negative. And everything seems to want to tear down who I am and diminish me because of the color of my skin, or because I'm a woman, or because of this, because of that. And I have to stay, on the positive. And, so it's like, and it's like, okay, what are the things you have to do? And you have to do those things, and she was just, first thing was just, I have to set those boundaries. I have to set those boundaries from those type of people. So it doesn't take me down to become like them.
That might be a segue into another couple of questions I wanted to pursue. If it ain't the internet bumping you off, it's daddy bumping you off. My gosh,
the negativity.
I
don't need these negative vibes, Moriarty.
I don't know that I want to be there when the camera turns off.
She gets the grandchild, I get the dog, we're all good.
There we go.
Positive waves.
Nice. What was I saying about? Negativity. Well, okay. If it's one thing if you can set those boundaries. I mean, everybody has to set boundaries, but it gets harder when you're surrounded, where you live, etc., by some things that this is not what I would choose. What about that?
Can we go back just? I want us to touch on one more thing before we go forward.
Please.
I feel like we can't understate the role that's the things like even hunger play in a student's ability to be successful in school. Because
you're saying that because you're really hungry right now, right? You're overdue for supper.
I mean, maybe partially, right. But what I will say is there were a lot of times when I was in school when this was something that I faced as well. It's kind of like a food uncertainty situation, and when you're hungry, it's hard to think. It's hard to work through things and figure out like all this classwork, and then emotional regulation even becomes more difficult. So then that kind of that kind of brings into play more about that the role of discipline within the school day, but it also like adds a question of like what are some ways that the schools can kind of think through that issue and without it being so punitive,
Mm.
because that's going to be a thing, especially when we have statistics like this. And hopefully we will not have statistics like this for like too much longer, but I mean at the same time this is reality, and so
Mhm.
this is something that people are facing.
Mm.
But it's interesting. Phil, you can relate too, as we went to the same high school, and food was served at lunchtime in this specific period of time, and that was it. There was no other
Mm-hmm.
food throughout the course of the day.
Yeah.
You couldn't have food anywhere and things like that. Well, now at the very same school, come in the morning, probably by 7 o'clock, the cafeteria is open, and the cafeteria stays open most of the day. I
Really?
think in ways. There's kids will come down to the classroom, my wife's classroom, and say, "Can I run to the cafeteria? I got to get something to eat."
Huh.
And I got to get something. And there's just a much. I mean, she struggles with that because it's like they want to come in and eat food around, the computerized sewing machines. It's like, no, probably not good, sit over there or something. But, there's just almost a constancy to it. But, there's, again, behind that, what Ruth said about food insecurity.
Food
I've been
insecurity.
hungry, but it's never been food insecurity.
Yeah.
I knew I could get food. But to not know if you can have food or not, or if there's going to be something when you get home, or I don't know. I have no idea what that would be like.
Mm-hmm.
And then so to see, the accommodations being made, the shift being made to say, yeah, we need to do this to help our students be present
Good
and
for them.
be doing this. They've got some struggles back and forth with that. Sometimes things get out of hand, or you got to draw some boundaries with that, but to recognize there is a need. And I'm just going like, why is the cafeteria still open third hour or something like that? It's like,
amazing.
Breakfast and you're closed, and then you open for lunch. But no, there's a need. It seems to be at different times. And
very good.
And it's great to see that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, when that blood sugar drops.
Oh yeah. Yeah. A fed kid is a happy kid. I like that. Yeah.
Well, and the fighting and the stigmatization that goes along with these food programs and that again too. It's just like, what's the deal here? It's food. Give people food. And we make it a make or break thing sometimes with people that. And you think, I've seen videos too of the pressures on a kid that comes to school and they don't have a lunch, like in grade school, or and they're trying to hide that because of the shame that goes with that. I don't have a lunch, and it's just some deeply powerful things out there to kind of watch in that area, that to recognize difficulties there.
Yeah.
There's the bit about uncertainty, not knowing about food. What? Oops. People throwing baby food away because it's not approved.
That's crazy.
Wow. Yeah. Anything else on the food thing? I'm thinking of another topic that came to mind with this uncertainty thing, living in uncertainty.
With the food, when Diamond wrote that about throwing away the food, because it's not approved, and the issue that, like, okay, so the school is providing food that's supposed to be nourishing. That was a big thing that came through the Obama presidency too, was providing better foods and that, and yet then there'd be the naysayers saying, well, look at how much is thrown away, look what's thrown away. And there it's like, okay, is this food even though it's better, is it familiar to these children? Is it something that they even understand? Or is it something that I don't even know what that is? Because they haven't had the opportunity to have those vegetables or something like that. How do you address that? To broaden their palate range, let's say, to like something.
Yeah.
What a challenge. We're so quick to just throw out a good idea because it's not catching on right away, or not everyone's doing the best with it. But if you can get a carrot in a kid, just one.
Yeah.
In nachos. That's why they're in nachos.
You just raised an unpleasant memory for Ruth.
Oh, so it looks like what Diamond's referring to here is like families who provide their own lunch and then they have something that the school doesn't like and then they throw it away.
Sure.
Really?
Sure.
The
Because
school?
they can't afford paid lunches or get vouchers. Yeah, I think at that point, I don't think that's helpful at all.
Yeah.
If someone is actually going through the trouble of like bringing their own lunch, like why would you throw their food away?
This is something that happens. The officials will say, "Oh, what that lunch you brought? It's not good. We are going to throw it away and not let you eat it."
Yeah.
Wow.
And whereas the parent knows this is what my child will eat today.
Yeah.
And they're going to eat something.
Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The lunch police. That's a real touchy area, of course, all around. But that's a huge challenge. Wow. Yeah.
Well, Phil, you said there was another topic that you had on your mind.
Okay,
hold on. We have Diamond's sharing with us something that she said, yeah, my sister had this experience where we only had food stamps, but we also couldn't get the free lunch voucher. So my sister brought sandwiches and the teachers took food from her.
Didn't replace it, just said, no, you can't eat that? What the? Oh my goodness.
I'm sorry, but that makes me feel some kind of way.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Man, oh man.
I mean, maybe some food isn't necessarily the best, but look into what the situation is. Find out what's going on.
Right.
Don't just take food away.
Yeah.
And it's sandwiches. It's like,
yeah.
How bad can a sandwich be?
Right.
That's bologna. Can it bologna?
Yeah, geez.
It's just ketchup. I don't know.
Wasted food and didn't eat all day. Oh my gosh. Yes. Makes no sense.
This is the struggle that we have is there's a good thought process behind, we want this child eating healthy food.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good thought, but then it comes out in a way that just undermines everything. Mm-hmm. And the way that you go about, it's like, I mean, here comes the hammer, right? Instead of the teaching, the understanding of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. And that all or nothing mentality that either it's going to be, is this completely healthy according to our guidelines, or it's out. Instead of, well, okay, this isn't the best, but it is food, and it's going to keep them awake, and etc. Yeah. Like they care about food allergies, they don't care about starving. Yeah, everybody's allergic to starvation.
Yeah.
Here's something that I wish that people took a little bit more seriously, and it really goes back to like this thought of education, which is education isn't automatically getting someone from point A to point Z. It's taking them along the road and walking with them through that to help them learn these different things. Mm-hmm. And it seems like when it comes to things like like the challenges that people are facing, they're not taking into account really where point A is. So how are they going to
Mm-hmm.
walk with people all the way to point Z if they don't even understand A in the first place?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mhm.
the other thing about students and kids, and really people in general, we can tell when people care about us and when they don't.
Yeah.
And these sorts of policies that are put in place and these sorts of actions kind of communicate pretty clearly we don't care. Even
Uh-huh.
though that might not necessarily be the heart of people, it's what's being communicated by these
Mm-hmm.
actions and by
Mm-hmm.
enforcing them without really any thought into how they're being enforced.
Yeah. Wow. Whew. Man. Uh, Bringing it back to the poverty and incarceration connection. Um, how you mentioned before, people are going to live up to or live down to expectations. Um, and if it's demonstrated, if it's obvious people care about me, that I'm important, well, that's going to have a profoundly positive effect. If I can
Mhm.
see people care, even if they're fumbling with it, dropping the ball, but if I can see that they really want the best for me, even if they're not the best at going about it, that's going to make a difference. I've seen that repeatedly. People showing, I think of all the people that were just so clumsy and inept at showing their care for me, but they cared. And that was what finally got through to me. They thought I was important. Um,
Mhm.
I know I'm just a long way around to saying it's we need to set up good policies, etc. But most important is to say, work with these kids, show people you care, and watch where that takes them.
And let's kind of go back a little bit tangentially, is when we think about the importance of showing people that we care,
Hmm.
and also look at the basis really of the Christian faith, which is Jesus leaving heaven to come down to earth, walk among us, and really ultimately sacrifice even his life to show that he did care. And yes, I know there's some other things in there about sin and the doctrinal points and all that, but
Hmm.
it's important to note that was a part of it though,
Mhm. Mhm.
because
Big big part.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
if we're taking into consideration our call as Christians to be followers of Christ, people who follow him not just in words but also in actions, then
Hmm.
what that would lead us to is
Hmm.
to a more sacrificial lifestyle, as
Hmm.
a more of a lifestyle that seeks to understand where people are coming from so that we can serve them.
Hmm.
Say it, Phil.
Oh, what's it?
Preach it, sister.
Yes.
Preach it.
Yeah. Ooh. I can't remember who it was. Somebody pointed out to me in the book of Mark when Jesus called his apostles. Uh, it it has the wording to the effect of he called them so that they might be with him, and that he could lead them, teach them, train them, etc. But it was important. The first thing is that he might be with them.
Mhm.
Uh, that point there, that I'm not just going to throw, here's some important stuff you should know, and go off and digest it, whatever. It's got to be walking with people. That's what Jesus did.
Mhm.
I'm not just going to teach you stuff and send you off. I'm going to be with you.
But if you look at the ministry of Jesus, what did he teach his disciples?
Hmm.
What's recorded for us? It's the things he did with
Hmm.
people.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there's one sermon pretty much in the Sermon on the Mount, and that pretty much leads in the same direction of
Mm-hmm.
loving others and caring for them, being with them. But then when you see him, well, the things that are recorded, it's like what? Jesus was with these people in
Mm-hmm.
various ways. Two that stand out for me though always is Zacchaeus and the woman at the well. I mean, it's
Yeah.
Zacchaeus, it's like, let's eat.
Mhm.
That's it. Let's eat. We don't hear
Huh?
anything about Jesus, what he said to him. They ate, and Zacchaeus came out, and he lived a different life. He approached things differently. I mean, if what happened there was what Jesus said to him, I think we would have those words.
Good point.
But it wasn't the words; it was the presence of Jesus. And the same thing with the woman at the well. He sees me for who I am, and sees me for what's happened to me, and still cares about me in a way that I haven't been cared about.
Yeah, and that that last example of the woman at the well kind of, and this might be a little off topic, but it reminds me of is it Hagar, Abraham's wife's servant?
Yeah.
And the name that she gives to God, even though the life that she's promised isn't necessarily like the best life that you would want to have. It's still that acknowledgement of, hey, God sees me.
God sees.
God sees me. Yes, yes. Huge, wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, the study of Hagar is interesting. I read something recently, and I'm not up on that, but it was like, oh, I never really thought about some of the things that she went through and some of the things she did and what she suffered and how she responded. God sees me. Wow. Yeah. So see the people, right?
Yeah.
We don't. My saying is when people question what I'm doing, I say I don't deal with denominations. I don't deal with movements. I deal with people.
Nice.
And that's where it starts and ends.
Right.
It's the person that's loved by God, for whom Jesus died and walked and did everything he did. Yeah.
Including make wine.
Including who? What?
Make wine. Well, you said everything you did, so.
Okay.
All right. So let's. I'm sorry. See, this is what happens when Ruth doesn't eat.
I'm still confused.
Okay, so you said that for whom Jesus did everything he did. Yeah. And so I said, including make wine.
Oh, make wine.
We both didn't hear that word.
I did get the make. First, I thought you were saying somebody's name, Miquan.
Miquan, yeah.
My friend Miquan. Do I know Miquan?
I better not say that word. Darn these ears,
Yeah.
Diamond says y'all haven't read your Bible apps lately.
That's right.
Like Igor, darn these eyes.
Too late. All right. So is this the weekly who's going to pray time?
Yeah.
Okay, well, Mark is already putting his yarmulke on, so he's
Miquan, that's the keeper of the keys' new name. Okay.
Oh boy, keeper of the keys.
Diamond says Phil is praying us out. Why?
Diamond says I am.
She has been directing this show today, so I think so. She's like the producer in the background, isn't she?
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Super duper. Well, I could do that.
Take two, camera 2. On film.
All right, here we go. On your mark, get set. Lord God, I love what Ruth said here about you, that this whole thing about you leaving heaven, coming into this really impoverished existence in so many ways, an impoverishment that we can't imagine what you gave up. And you did it. And you did it for us. And as a result of that, we can be more than what we would have been on our own. We can be infinitely more. We already are, because we're loved. We're forgiven. We're accepted. We're citizens of heaven. And right now, while we're on earth, Lord, help us to understand. Help us to see. Like Mark said, help us to look and see the people that tend to be invisible. Help us to see what they're going through. Help us to be seen too. All of us, Lord, open up our eyes. Help us see each other, and help us to love all the things that are keeping people down. Help us to see those things and get them out of the way. Help us to get past our usual ways of thinking, the assumptions that we have, and think your way. We need this, Lord God. We need your Holy Spirit. So send him to us, work in us, and we turn ourselves over to you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you to everyone for being here tonight. Thank you, Diamond.
Okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Have a good night.
Okay. Adios.